Okay, with my action research, if I could say the word action, my action research project, I based on using podcasting in the classroom. And the reason why I chose podcasting is because I think it is a very creative tool to use when trying to engage the other types of technology out there that our students are using. My students, my students started out. I kind of had to implement this within my lesson because, or within my unit, excuse me, because I didn't know how familiar they were with podcasting. I know I wasn't familiar with it back in August when we learned, so it wasn't a shock to me that they didn't know much about it or that they had used the tool before. But I didn't know where to start, so I kind of let them tell me when I introduced it the first day. And the main reason why I ended up using it is because I wanted to give my students another outlet to express themselves rather than just writing. I had multiple students who were MR, multiple students that were illiterate. And every time they were given a writing assignment, they were not given much assistance. Um, and they ultimately just banked on failing. They knew they weren't going to be able to do it, so they didn't try. And I didn't use podcasting as a way to show them that they didn't have to write. I used it as a way to show them that there are other things that encompass writing, but doesn't necessarily have to be focused on grammar and punctuation and writing and spelling. Um, and much to my dismay, I guess, if you will, some of those students were excused from this project, which is a whole nother uh, discussion. Um, but ultimately, I didn't have the choice. It was out of my control. It was up to my CT and the education teacher in the classroom. And it was kind of just one of those things that wasn't really discussed with me. It was just kind of I had to accept, which would not be the way I would handle it if I were a teacher. But as a student teacher, there are some things I think I realized that you just kind of have to let go. So there were a few, but ultimately some of them still were able to do it, which I really was excited about. And then I didn't just do this project for them. I used it for all of my students, and the reason why I wanted to use it for all of my students is because I just wanted them to be exposed to something, that a tool that they can learn from that doesn't necessarily have to just do with pen and paper. I think there is a lot of concentration in schools and in the education system on, kind of with the saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I get that. I get that a lot. But I still think that if our students are using iTunes and they have iPods, why not show them a different way that they can use them? And that's ultimately why I wanted to use podcasting. I also used podcasting because my students, the majority of them, did not have internet access at home. And I did not want them to feel neglected or pressured to figure out a way just so that they could fit it into this unit. That wasn't the point of it. So I tried to work around that whole situation, and I made it so that all of the entire project was done in school if they were keeping up. So there are multiple reasons that went into my project. Ultimately, it worked out great. A lot of my students at the beginning, I took a day and I let them listen to the Radio Willow Web with the second graders. I believe they're second graders from Nebraska, and how they do it every month. And that kind of was very encouraging for my students because they were feeling vulnerable, and they didn't know what they were supposed to do, and they didn't know what it was supposed to sound like and how one was created, which I get all that. I was the same way. Was like 6 months ago now. So I'd spend a day showing them how we would, use it in the classroom, and how other people would get to hear it, and which would, engage an authentic audience. And that was where I lost a lot of them. A lot of them were very scared to put their name to something, which surprised me in a way, but didn't, because I felt the same way. It is nerve-wracking. Ultimately, it is very nerve-wracking no matter what you tell someone. But the more exposure and the more experience they have using this tool, the less nervous they will feel about it. And I explained that to them, and when it came to the actual day where they are podcasting, they sort of lost that apprehension, and they were very excited to be doing something different in the classroom. So I think the way it moved my students was that they found out that they were able to use their creative skills to enhance their writing style, in a sense that they learned how to communicate in an effective way with other people. They had to, ultimately, what they had to do is they had to research a culture within groups that were assigned to them, and those groups were differentiated based on need level. They could pick a culture of their choice that they were unfamiliar with, an author from that culture, and then a book about that culture. And ultimately, they were giving a book talk with information about the culture and the author inserted into the book talk. And my students, especially the ones that are MR, amazed me. I don't know any other way to put it. They just took off with this assignment. There were some that were confused, and what surprised me the most was that this project really stumped my gifted students. And the reason why it stumped them, it was because there weren't any right or wrong answers. And for students who are very gifted, they're not used to hearing that. For them, there's always a correct equation, and there's always a correct solution that they need to reach. And that wasn't the case with this project. The writing was pretty much free flow. There was no structure to it. It had to be script mode, but they could do a radio show, a talk show, a news show, anything they wanted to do, they could do it. And they could use music that they wanted to insert into it. And that scared them the most. But when we did the book talk, something that I realized during the podcasting that I did not foresee was how much time the podcasting was going to actually take. My students wanted to keep doing, 3 or 4 takes. And I tried to tell them that that wasn't the point. The point was to be original, and they didn't have to be right. It didn't have to sound perfect. It was okay if they sounded a little southern in something. They were so afraid to be themselves that they wanted to just critique everything they were doing. And it took them a while to realize that it's okay. This was just, it wasn't just, it was for fun, but there's an educational point to it. And that was really hard for me to explain to them, because they're not, I don't want to overly state this, but they're just not used to the fact that they have the choice to do something in the classroom. And I really think it exposed them to a different side of education entirely. And that was one of my main goals. And I really just wanted everyone to be able to participate in something. And unfortunately, there were some things that were out of my control. But in the end, I had 3 of my students who are MR and illiterate do an amazing job. And this one particular girl who never speaks up in class and has a really hard time and is on the brink of MR, she was put in a group, as I said, they're differentiated. And while we were doing the podcasting, she was having a lot of trouble reading her part of the script. But one of her group members helped her out during it, and not in an embarrassing way, but just kind of pointed to the words she needed to say, and it worked out perfect. And that really was just an example of why differentiation is important, especially in using technology when students are vulnerable. So ultimately, it worked out better than expected, but there are things that I would like to change, and one of those things that I'd like to change is giving more time. I think that needs to be structured differently in the way that mine was in 4 weeks, and I think it needs to be even longer than that, especially when introducing students to it for the first time. That would be one things that I would change about how I did this project. But I think the book talks went well. They really enjoyed the process. They learned a lot from it, and they saw the point, which I think are all of the 3 of my goals that I really wanted to accomplish with this podcasting project. So I definitely recommend using podcasting or any of the web tools that are out there in the classroom.